comes from God and is by faith. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. It is possible to know about somebody without knowing them. We've read this morning about Saul's pedigree. He was of the tribe of Benjamin. Now Benjamin was the second son of Jacob and Rachel. Jacob had 12 sons. Rachel had 2. You remember the story of how Jacob worked for Laban, his father-in-law, for 7 years to get Rachel as his wife. At the wedding ceremony, when he lifted the veil, it was not Rachel at all, it was Leah. And Laban said, we have a rule here, the oldest daughter has to be married first. So then we find that Jacob worked an additional 7 years after he married Rachel, which is the one that he really, really loved. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin, one of the great tribes of Israel. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews, and in regard to the law, he says, a Pharisee. Now the Pharisees were 6,000 of the elite Jews who felt it was their job to keep pure the faith, the Jewish faith. They upheld the temple. They believed in the Sabbath. They did many admirable things and admirable traits. Most of the time when Jesus comes in contact with the Pharisees, we see them in a bad light. But they really did some good things. The Pharisees intended to put the Scriptures and religion into the hands of the common people. The Sadducees, on the other hand, were of the aristocracy, and they sort of kept religion to themselves. But the Pharisees wanted the common man to experience God and to know him. So it was their job in protecting the temple and protecting the Scriptures, protecting the Sabbath. I am told that the Pharisees elevated the position of women in their culture. But Jesus often came into sharp contrast and conflict with the Pharisees. Saul, being a Pharisee, was zealous. He was willing to do whatever it took to preserve the Jewish faith. That involved many times being an accessory to murder. It involved persecution because he was a good Pharisee. Now, no doubt Saul knew about Jesus. In Matthew 23, we have the account of where Jesus verbally abuses the Pharisees. He called them hypocrites, blind leaders of the blind. He said, you're like whitewashed tombs. You know, you look nice on the outside, but inside you are full of dead men's bones. He called them on one occasion fools, snakes, even sons of hell. So no doubt Saul the Pharisee knew exactly who Jesus was. He knew of his teachings if he had not met him personally. We have no account in the Scripture of where Saul met Jesus personally prior to the road to Damascus experience. Saul's life was spent in the study of the Scriptures, in implementing and preserving the law. In Acts chapter 7, we have the account of the first martyr, Stephen. Stephen, early on in the Christian circles, became a disciple and a preacher. And he was dragged in before the Sanhedrin. 70 of the Jewish nobles, and was to preach before them and defend himself before the Sanhedrin. And he talked about Abraham, and they were fine with that. He talked about Moses, and they were fine with that. He talked about Joseph, and his trip down to Egypt and all that happened. And he talked about that, and that was fine. But eventually he addressed them and their ancestors for taking the prophets and abusing them and even killing some of the prophets who came to speak of the Messiah. He talked about the righteous one, being Jesus, who they had betrayed and murdered. He got rather pointed. He quit preaching and went to meddling, didn't he? And they were furious. They gnashed their teeth, the scriptures tell us in Acts chapter 7. They stopped their ears and they screamed at the top of their lungs because they didn't like what they were hearing. And they drug Stephen out of the city into the highway and stoned him to death. And the scriptures tell us they laid their coats at the feet of a man named Saul of Tarsus. Now Saul, as a Pharisee, probably would not participate in the actual stoning. But he stood there with his arms folded, consenting to the death of the first martyr. Jesus told a parable on one occasion of a Pharisee and a publican who were in the temple praying. And the Pharisee was standing up and he was praying, "Lord, I am glad I'm not like these others who stand around here, these thieves, these liars, these cheats. I give 1/10 of my income to you every week, and I fast twice a week." And on the other hand was the Pharisee, the tax collector actually, who was praying beside him. And the scripture said that he would not even lift up his eyes, but he kept his head down and he beat his chest. And he said, "Lord, forgive me, a sinner." Which one went down justified, Jesus said. Of course, it was the publican. Jesus was hard on the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were angry about it. Saul knew exactly who Jesus was and was going about stamping out that upstart religion called the Way. He consented to Stephen's death. He consented to the death of others. It is possible to know somebody but not really know them. To really know someone requires a personal encounter. A few weeks back, Hillary Davis came up to me after the service and she said, "I met somebody that you'd want to meet. Last night it was great. We had an encounter in Louisville and I met this guy who was really an important guy." And I said, "Well, who is it?" "Well, who is it?" And she said, "I met Aaron Rodgers." And I said, "You did? Man, that's great. I'd love to meet him." Now you're sitting here wondering, who in the world is Aaron Rodgers? Well, he's the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. And of course, me being from Wisconsin, I'm very excited about Aaron Rodgers. But she was so excited about meeting him personally. What an honor. In Acts chapter 9, we have the account of where Saul meets Jesus personally. In 9:1, we find Saul breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. Paul went to Damascus with a letter from the priests authorizing him to drag out Christians, arrest them, and take them back to Jerusalem. Now, let's paint the picture a little bit here for you. It's like Damascus from Jerusalem is 120 miles. It's like saying to me, "Ken, what are you going to do this week?" "Well, I'm going to get on my horse, and I'm going to ride to Knoxville, okay, and drag out Christians and bring them back to Berea and have them stand trial." He was zealous.